This is it. I'm doing it. I'm reviewing Devil May Cry 2. I knew at some point within my creative endeavors and online career I would talk about just how much of a royal disappointment this game was, and wanting to have a proper expose discussing the incompetency and poor handling Capcom has done with the sequel to one of the greatest action games of all time. This will be no small feat, but I think I finally found a game that has conjured up the inducement I needed to make one of these deep dive videos. I'm Skrillly DVG, and come with me to unravel just what exactly went wrong with Devil May Cry 2, and perhaps uncover some things it may have actually done right. So strap in because this is going to be a long video. Oh, and full spoilers ahead. Devil May Cry 2 is a direct continuation of the first one, now following Dante several years later, with Dante being 28 in DMC1. We now are following Dante well into his 30s, being more reserved and striking a more mature appearance in Devil May Cry 2. This wasn't always the narrative though. Before 2019, 2 took place after DMC4, but it has since been changed to the inverse officially by Capcom. Why they made this change is a mystery, as Dante is a giant goofball in 4.
In the end, we're all satisfied.
While Dante in 2 is way more reserved and is what I like to coin Date. You can write this off as creative differences between the teams, but they probably retcon it so they can make sense of Dante doing this in Devil May Cry 5. To better fit the continuity of the character of Dante they had officially established with DMC3. Devil May Cry 2 had quite the rocky development. First off, this game would not be created by the initial team Little Devils, nor did Hideki Kamiya have any involvement with the sequel. It was instead handed off to a less experienced team who had only had their hand in developing arcade titles. At the helm of the project was Hideaki Itsuno this time around, and the team had the big goal of making the game twice the game the first one was. And I mean that literally. They wanted the game to have open levels. The producer of the game, Tsuyoshi Tanaka, stating the environments of the levels will be 9 times as big as in the first adventure. At the time, DMC's levels being divided into separate missions was actually a point of contention with players and was a common complaint. But that was probably an excuse behind the blatant disdain the new team had for the first Devil May Cry. Yes, the new team for Devil May Cry 2 did not like Devil May Cry. And to add insult to injury, the original devs had no idea this sequel was even being developed. So, due to the success of the first one, Capcom had the side team develop Devil May Cry 2 in only half a year, which is very telling and kinda answers the surface level questions one may have when having a bad time playing Devil May Cry 2 for the first time. The made-up shortcomings the new team had about Devil May Cry 1 would be undermined by how big DMC2 had planned to be, or so they thought. Because boy, were they wrong. The more open level design is a common fallacy you'll hear often, but I'll get to that key detail later in the video. In the Devil May Cry 2 preview, Tanaka states, "The length of the initial game's missions was troubling. Some were short, others lengthy. Here, we've created a game that you can play for hours or just a little bit, if you'd rather stop and watch TV instead." I have no idea what was the implication behind this. You could do that with any game really. Don't see why Tanaka used this as a counter argument with the design of DMC1. If anything, missions being based behind the design philosophy of larger levels would imply you are less likely to stop mid-mission and instead soldier on to complete the mission, or quit altogether and have to play through the mission again if you're really eager to watch your friends' reruns. But just because Capcom had made very poor decisions in regards to developing this game, I wouldn't really blame Itsuno with how lackluster the final product turned out to be, because Itsuno was an already established video game director at the company for some time. They had made him lead and basically asked him to rush the game he had not been prepared for. If anyone deserves to have the accusing finger pointed at, it needs to be the producer of the game, Tsuyoshi Tanaka, for the mishandling. The team had little to nothing to show for it, so they got Itsuno to lead the charge to get a sequel finished as quickly as possible. Here's an excerpt by Itsuno himself on the development of Devil May Cry 2. "There was a lot of drama over my replacing the old director, and I have nothing but bad memories about that part in particular. But basically they said that nothing was getting done and that needed to change. The scenario hadn't been written, the cutscenes hadn't yet been shot, and they haven't decided what to do about Dante's Devil Trigger. It's actually quite impressive the game even works at all to begin with. A rushed development cycle comprised of only 4 to 5 months, and a development team basically being fish out of water working on a game out of their expertise is nothing short of a miracle. But it really shows how talented Itsuno is at piecing together something that actually looks like a game, functions like a game, but doesn't quite play as a Devil May Cry game. In this next segment, I will be discussing the simplification of mechanics present in Devil May Cry 2, some design flaws that aren't easily dismissible, the overall difficulty of the game, and just pointing out some shortcomings that make it the inferior sequel that it is. With the context of this being a rush game from an already established prototype that initially was going to be a Tomb Raider clone, it's easy to see why this game plays so foreign in comparison to the rest of the franchise. In Devil May Cry 2, you start off with your default difficulty, that being normal, but the enemy AI seems to act like you put on some god mode cheat code with how passive their attack patterns can be. The attacks often breeze by you even when you put in little effort to try to evade. You can quite literally walk a few steps to either side of the enemy to completely dodge their attacks. This gets rid of any agency for the player and is a far cry from the intense encounters we faced in the title prior. I'm usually in defense of very accurate hitboxes in video games, but in this particular case, it seems to give the player way too much of an advantage. I say this because your character has too many options for evasion, while the enemies you face do not. You'll never see the AI block your attacks apart from some bosses, you'll never see them try to dodge oncoming attacks, something they fix in Devil May Cry 3, and sometimes they will just be downright unresponsive, like they became passive with Dante. While Dante now has the ability to spam dodge rolls, double jumps, and run along walls to prevent you from taking any sort of damage. The combat and upgrade system has been completely tweaked from what we've grown accustomed to, with the biggest hit being the simplification of swordplay. Throughout the game, Dante will come in contact with 4 different swords. Your starting sword is the newly introduced Rebellion, which is already equipped with the moveset you had to unlock with Alistair in the previous game. Maybe the devs are thinking that it would be more consistent if Dante kept up with the moves he had learned in the past, or, of course, it could be due to the extremely rushed development cycle. In Mission 7, you'll find Vendetta, which is this buster type sword. When you pick this one up, you might think to yourself, oh man, this is going to hit really hard, but wind up and recovery time will be really slow, so I'll have to time my attacks accordingly. Well, not exactly. It's the exact same moveset as Rebellion under the guise of being the harder hitting weapon, but there's really no evidence to prove this, nor any stats to look at. If anything else, it just gives the illusion of such. In Mission 11, you'll pick up Merciless, which is a longer range sword with, you guessed it, the same moveset as the other 2 swords. I honestly couldn't tell the difference of if its reach was actually superior or not. The drawback of the sword is that it has the lowest raw damage output of all the swords you collect. So with the range advantage being very negligible, I would see no reason to actually upgrade Merciless unless you wanted it to be your main weapon for pure aesthetics alone. The final weapon received is the Force Edge, the initial sword from the initial game. But get this, you have to finish Dante Must Die mode first. And guess what else? It's actually just a cosmetic for Rebellion. You'll have to put in at least 12 hours just to get a skin of a sword that you quickly moved away from in Devil May Cry 1. There aren't any unique weapons to be found here. No awesome Ifrit gauntlets. No new weapon mechanics were added in what's supposed to be a sequel game. Just swords, swords, and more swords that play the exact same. Remember how quick and responsive the swordplay was in Devil May Cry 1? Well, hope you weren't too fond of it, because here Dante strikes like he's anemic. Wind up time of base attacks feels like there's an input delay to your button press, and the recovery after a combo is far too slow if you aren't committed in executing your attacks on a particular enemy, which the lock-on system of the game makes that task downright impossible. Depending on the proximity of the enemy, the automatic lock-on will just snag onto whoever is closest. There is no way to switch the lock-on from one enemy to another, a la joystick, like any good game would be designed to do. DMC2's answer to this conundrum is to instead dedicate its right shoulder button into functioning as a lock-on cancellation. The last thing you want to do is hold on to the shoulder button while you're trying to execute combos when it hardly is beneficial to do so, unless its shoulder button was to instead be the input for locking on. Actually, it would make perfect sense to graph it to R1 instead, as this already acts as Dante's readying position and it activates Dante's sinker move, which already puts him on a set path to a single enemy anyways. So it would make a lot more sense, and I'm very confused to how Capcom overlooked this. Dante is also very directional in his movement when attacking. He's very stiff and he doesn't move in a 360 swivel as you would expect him to. This is one of the biggest contributing factors to what makes DMC2 feel so unintuitive to play. Also, it doesn't help that all the enemies feel like sword sponges. None of your attacks feel very impactful. Sure, the enemy's animations might play a little differently depending on your guard break, but the satisfaction of hitting enemies is way more undermined than what you would expect from a Devil May Cry game. You can no longer do slash canceling with Dante for a quick recovery after swinging your sword, so getting a grade higher than C with your combos can be a difficult task. Unless you're getting ganked by a swarm of enemies in a closed space, or you just want to resort to dodging and using your firearms. The advanced combos are done by pushing a direction during the attack sequences, which makes the execution feel very awkward and very unreliable, whereas the button delay system in every other Devil May Cry game makes combos feel so rhythmic and satisfying. All you have to do is figure out the timing you need to do the delays so you can execute them with confidence. But here, it is very uncertain whether you're going to execute it depending on the direction that you have Dante in a given space. The grading meter also halts when Dante is hit by an enemy, unlike the first one, starting your grade back to below D anytime an enemy lands a hit on you. And this is probably why 2 is considered to having the harshest stylish rating system of all the titles. And in a crowd of enemies, choreographed attacks can't be easily avoidable because of Dante's annoying recovery time even when you're fully cognizant of the enemy's attack patterns. Taunts are gone this time around, which would help with keeping up your grade in DMC1, but because this Dante is super serious in this one, there's no time for braggadocious tomfoolery. Also, what's up with the new grading system's names? D for don't worry? What is that even supposed to imply? Don't worry that you're not playing so good? There's hardly a game to get good at in the first place. C for come on? Is this game asking me if that's all I got, or am I supposedly supposed to be bringing some sort of heat to the game? B for bingo would imply that I did the best combos and that I'm right on the money in terms of how stylish I slash my foes, but there's 2 more letter grades above B. A is for are you ready? How does this elicit a rank above bingo? Am I ready to get a S rank, or am I ready to give up on trying to get a good grade for this mission? And finally S. The highest grade stands for Showtime, which I actually think is fitting, so no critique here. Also, Showtime would be used in a much better game in the SS rank of Devil May Cry 3. But I digress. Let's move on to how upgrades are handled in this game. The upgrade system is, well, a downgrade for a lack of a better word. You pump your hard-earned red orbs into your weapons for only an increase in damage on said weapon. You will not learn any cool new moves to spice up combat. Instead, you're chugging along Dante's sword in the same unenthusiastic manner with the last boss fight as you did with the very first enemy. And with just how easy the combat already is, you might be persuaded in spending your orbs elsewhere on items, but this route also makes boss fights drag out longer than they feel like they should, with some bosses' health bars being layered. This doesn't exactly translate to the game being more difficult, rather it feeling like a waste of the player's time. If the player doesn't upgrade their weapons, they could be stuck in a boss arena for longer than the player's attention span calls for. On the other hand, if you were to upgrade your devil trigger frequently, boss battles will be over in a breeze, with the player not even having the chance to see some of the boss's special moves that are underutilized in the game's default difficulty. So this really strikes an imbalance with the game's difficulty. Like I discussed previously, the game gives you too many options to overcome your obstacles. This leaves boss encounters seeming much more of a drag than an interesting fight that will test the player's skills. Giving the player nothing to struggle over will actually make them less engaged with the game, hence why this game is overlooked as extremely dull and underwhelming. I'm not sure if there were a lot of complaints regarding Devil May Cry 1's difficulty at the time, but it seems the new team retaliated by overcompensating by soft pedaling. Hardly any enemies will take a damper on your health bar, and it seems once your health gets too low, the game will spurt out green orbs out of random enemies very frequently. Even in boss arenas, they are handing out green orbs like they're candy, being placed all around the arena. A fair method you will often see in video games is that before walking into a boss arena, the game will give you healing items to give the player a fair chance of facing the boss at your character's most optimal. But in Devil May Cry 2, they supply you with what I would argue is too many healing opportunities to the point you never have to worry about player death. This overcompensation could be a rationalization the studio had out of fear of player frustration that could eventually lead to losing interest in continuing a game. I just realized I spat some hot bars there. That was actually unintentional. This is a understandable way of thinking on the devs' part, as if I personally hit a difficulty wall in whichever game I'm playing, I'm prone to put the game down at intervals at a time. But the counter argument here is that when a game gets to the point of seeming impossible, it often itches away at the player in their off time and piques their interest in said game, even more so than if they were able to accomplish said goal in the first try. I cannot back any of these claims on the developer's behalf, as there isn't any clear evidence of this in the development process. It is pure speculation under my personal experience with the game, and many others share anecdotes surrounding the game's difficulty. As per Devil May Cry fashion, you have your firearms to supplement the main sword play. Except this time around, you're much better off going through the game as if it were a third-person shooter. The guns are significantly buffed to where your swords are almost rendered useless, if not for a few given scenarios where they are put to more use. Upgrading any of your firearms to their max levels is a surefire way to play this game at its most optimal, but at its least engaging. The firearms will decimate most enemies in a flash, and is probably the easiest route to beating bosses quickly by going this third-person shooter route. Take for example the boss Plutonian in Mission 8. He has a set of ball and chain that doesn't reach you when he strikes, so you could just stand at the other side of the arena and just blast away and double trigger until his health dwindles away. With the game encouraging you to play this new way, they give you nothing new mechanically to work with. So if you know how the guns function in DMC 1, you know how the guns function in DMC 2. The only new addition to your arsenal are the submachine guns, which are ridiculously over the top, especially when handled in Dante's Devil Trigger mode. The way Dante locks in place abruptly to the next target firing away is downright comical. Although I guess they tried to balance out the strength of the firearms by making the price tag for upgrades extremely steep. The first upgrade you will make on Ebony and Ivory is a whopping 10,000 red orbs, and you earn red orbs about the same pace as the first game. The higher prices would actually work in making it seem worthwhile to upgrade your gun to the next level, but when there are no stats to go by just exactly how much it improves upon each level, it feels very insignificant when you don't see much of a difference in damage output after accumulating red orbs over a good amount of time. The reason upgrades worked so well in DMC 1 is that your weapons didn't improve in damage scaling, but rather Dante learned cool new moves that you were looking forward to trying out and experimenting with that kept the momentum of progression at a steady pace. Upgrading any of your swords or firearms in 2 just gives you maybe 2 seconds less off your time to finish off a base enemy, or down a boss in a marginal amount of time. But again, you play the exact same way. It's kind of like the developers are handing out pay-to-win upgrades. You play the exact same way, only the game is over faster. My next criticism is in a gray area, honestly. That's right, it's the introduction of the golden orbs. What sets the gold orbs apart from the standard yellow orbs is that instead of reviving Dante at the beginning of the previous room upon death, he instead revives on the spot, full of health and double trigger with no option menu. I do think the gold orbs work mechanically better than the yellow orbs, as repeating sections that didn't defeat you over and over again is not fun. I don't like how the game doesn't give me the option to use them at my leisure though. It just automatically happens. They are now a series staple though, so look, DMC2 actually brought us something good this time. But the downside of this implementation is that it's introduced in a game that's already too forgiving. Giving you the option to have the more forgiving mechanic made sense in a game like Devil May Cry 3, when the game is hard as nails, but not masochistically so. And knew when to give the players some breathing room if desired, so the golden orbs really shine in Devil May Cry 3, where it gives the player too much of an advantage in Devil May Cry 2. So even when you do collect these, you'll only probably use them in the hard modes of the game, talking about Devil May Cry 2. That is, if you can stomach more than one run of Devil May Cry 2's pretty bland story and mission structure. The puzzles leave a lot to be desired in this game. What am I talking about? There really are no puzzles, or at least nothing I would consider to be puzzles. I mean, what actually is the point of the room where these rotating orbs pop up in intervals and you just have to destroy enough of them? And that's what this whole room was made for, is just to waste the player's time. There's nothing interesting to engage with. These sections just feel like they pad the level out to make you feel like you're following a natural progression of level design. But there is no level design in this game. You just kind of keep going forward until you encounter the next obstacle that you don't even really have to pay any mind to. Hit X object to unlock Y door, and so on and so forth. The first Devil May Cry wasn't exactly intricate with their puzzles, but they were adequate enough to break up the moment-to-moment gameplay. And there was a level of actually figuring out what path Dante needs to go down to progress through the game. It mostly comprised of the structure, gather this item and then place it in this slot, but it was cryptic enough to where the player felt that sense of progression to where they felt they earned the screen to enter the next mission or to see a new area. In Devil May Cry 2, you'll often pause and ask yourself, was that really all there was to that mission? I haven't even really done anything, or at least done anything that would resemble a goal-oriented structure. This is an aspect that the first one nailed so well. You build up and up to where when you finally meet Mundus, it feels so earned and monumental. On the other hand, in DMC2, you just play missions with similar structures until you hit the final boss, and there is no feeling of working towards it, or really any feeling of accomplishment leading up to the final boss, or even after beating it. To put it frankly, the game feels so hollow, so shallow, it's actually quite literally a shell of its former self. The tight level design of 1 is completely absent in this game. The fun of 1 is completely absent. They traded in well-designed interconnected levels with open, lifeless environments with literally nothing to do in them. There's no cool secrets or unlockables to get you off the beaten path that would warrant a more open level design they so desperately wanted in this game. It really gives this game a desolate, unfinished feel to all of it. Speaking of things having an unfinished feel to them, let's talk about Dante in this game, shall we? You find Dante helping a client named Lucia in the island city of Valle de Marle to stop the insurrection of an evil international businessman named Arius from collecting items of Arcana that sealed away the Demon King Argisax. Lucia is your other playable character throughout the game for context, but I'll add on to that later. We are introduced to Amatier, her mother, who had once fought beside Sparta to protect the island.
You have arrived, son of Sparta.
You knew him?
Oh, yes. We are the guardians of this land, Vidumali. Our clan once fought against the demons with Sparta.
Montier then asks Dante to further help them, which he relies his answer on the fate of a coin toss.
Looks like it's your lucky day.
Yes, they actually implemented Harvey Dent's coin shtick, where both sides of the coin are the same side. This was a cool story that made sense with Dent.
That's why I'm not gonna leave it up to me. Heads, you gotta keep your head. Tails, not so lucky. So, you wanna tell me about the Joker?
But makes no sense with Dante.
Heads, I go. Tails, you go.
He tricked me. That macho.
So many people took issue to Dante's personality shift that it retroactively caused the canon of the order of the series to change so that DMC2 takes place between events of the first and fourth game. Dante now sports this weird, cold, brutish demeanor, which is apparently explained in a prequel novel to the game, which is due to him killing an army of Trish clones sent by Mundus in an alternate dimension. Yeah, what a stretch and convoluted way to excuse Dante's wooden personality. This stemmed, of course, from Tanaka. Apparently, he was not a fan of Dante's cockiness and him cracking jokes. Yeah, I feel like this man single-handedly wanted to sabotage this franchise out of some spite I'm not aware of, or maybe he was just tone deaf. But for Dante not being allowed to joke, he sure does have a lot of unintentionally hilarious lines.
Do you have to ask? Did you find what you were looking for? Whatever. It's from your daughter. What are you doing, Granny? That's just a piece of crap. Crap like that doesn't interest me. Don't speak. Just die. Yeah. Let's go all the way to hell.
It's like this Dante is trying too hard to be cool to impress bystanders instead of just being his playful self. I'm not saying Dante can't have his serious moments, but this guy is void of all charisma and energy. And don't get me wrong, I can acknowledge some lines from Dante in DMC1 can totally miss the mark.
I should have been the one to fill your dark soul with light!
But at least Coombs' performance still had energy behind it, even if the voice acting could fall a bit flat. This Dante had humanity, while Dante is robbed of it.
Whatever.
Leaving a robot that spits out one-liners.
King? Yeah. Here's your crown. My job is hunting devils. No.
Ask anyone who is a fan of the series who their least favorite Dante is, and it is a sure bet that they're gonna choose this one. Or not even acknowledge this iteration in the first place. I would argue making Dante boring takes away from the core of Devil May Cry. And while Matthew Kaminsky doesn't do a terrible job, I actually find his voice fitting for Dante, he's just not given anything to work with, really. Dante probably has a total of 12 lines throughout the game, and I am not exaggerating. So, Dante is a hired gun, a demon slayer, right? So, what is his motivation to having the aforementioned coin toss to help with his clients? This Dante relies on fate on whether he should help others or not, but really he's a great guy because the coin has the same side, so he helps no matter what. Okay? Seriously, what's the point of Dante doing this? Does he think this makes him look more normal, less biased on helping clients? Instead, he comes off as sort of a douche that could care less and genuinely helping others out of the kindness of his heart, which he does anyway. Maybe he wants people to see him as a douche, I don't know. I just think they thought this was a way of making Dante appear cooler and more mysterious. Also, as a final note, Dante doesn't get impaled by his own sword in this game. Worst Dante ever. In this final section, I will actually be defending Devil May Cry 2. It may seem that I'm going off course in conjunction to the whole theme of this analysis, but I do actually think this game is not without its merits. The general consensus of DMC2 is that this entry is entirely skippable, and you wouldn't really be missing out on any key story details if you're going through the whole Devil May Cry series anew. So, if you wanted to save yourself some time, you could just beeline right to 3 after beating DMC1. And while I can't blame anyone's justification for wanting to go that route, with just how many people bash this game, myself included, I think you could be missing out on an entry that's wholly unique, distinguished from the rest of the franchise, and also a decent action game to boot after you peel back some of its off-putting layers. Look, I'm not going to say this is a hidden gem or even a underappreciated classic, but I do honestly feel most people don't even try to look at some of the interesting things DMC2 has done to advance the franchise and 3D action games from the early 2000s forward. It's not revolutionary on the same basis as DMC1, far from it, but it's also far from being the total dumpster fire most people will make it out to be. I can both acknowledge its shortcomings without being one-sided as the internet would like commentary to be. But if you'd rather not hear the minutia seeking out a silver lining, then you're more than welcome to skip to this time code if you would just like to watch the conclusion of this video. I will be going into some tiny details that make it stand out from the rest of the franchise in a positive light, some good ideas that have since stuck with the franchise, Lucia's campaign, some unique game elements that's unique to this entry alone, and some pure subjectivity to boot. As I've alluded to before, the early development of DMC2 was supposed to be a Tomb Raider inspired game. It becomes apparent with just how much of the polish was put into our female protagonist. You can tell they actually wanted to dial in the sequel to be focused on this new character, Lucia, which I'm actually not opposed to. But if the game went on to be released without Dante, it would of course been a really controversial move. Even though we've seen this subversion of expectations to a sequel done successfully before in a big game franchise such as Metal Gear Solid 2, I would argue that Dante felt very shoehorned in, as having a separate campaign around him probably did more harm than if he was absent from the game entirely. Just think about it, there would be more mystique surrounding the entry if the sequel didn't even have Dante in it. It could have been a story that would fit in a larger picture of the series, but was cryptic at the time of its release that could have been a big payoff in the future. But now it's known as the stepchild of the franchise with not many references of its story, Dante's character change, or Lucia, she's just a one-off character. I could wrap my head around why it wouldn't have been seen as a good business decision, especially with a big company like Capcom, but with their irresponsible deadlines and staff change being so obtuse, they were already putting this game on a crash course with the interest of turning a quick profit from the success of the first game. But again, I digress. Lucia is about the only interesting aspect of the game, so if you don't want to play the full 31 missions this game has to offer to unlock costumes and higher difficulties, I would implore you to give at least Lucia's campaign a shot. It shares many of the levels and boss fights that's in Dante's story, but in a much tighter package, rounding to 13 missions instead of Dante's 18 missions. You may miss out on a few sections pertaining to Dante's story, but Lucia's story has a few unique locations to add with just the important bits of Dante's story, or the highlights, if you will. Lucia's gameplay feels a heck of a lot better. Playing through her campaign actually makes you start to feel like you're playing a proper Devil May Cry sequel. And at harder difficulties, all the issues regarding the game's difficulty I talked at length about totally disappear. This goes for Dante's campaign as well, but with Lucia's tighter controls, I feel hers fares far better than the more aggressive enemy AI introduced and the more challenging difficulties. Lucia is quick and agile and controls surprisingly well. It feels night and day compared to Dante's missions. She comes equipped with these dual-wielding swords that are quick and responsive. Complementing her are these throwing daggers, bombs, and a nice kick move that has decent feedback to it. Don't get me started on the hidden combos she has that the game doesn't even tell you about for some reason. I could honestly say I was having fun with the game going through her missions. I was still underwhelmed, sure, but entertained nonetheless. It's just unfortunate that the game's higher difficulties are locked behind having to finish both Lucia's and Dante's missions. And in order to play the character must die mode, you'll have to beat the game 2 times over, clocking in a whopping 62 missions, just to play DMC2 at its best. And at that point, you'll be dog tired of the game seeing the same bland environments 4 times over. If only Capcom had implemented the choice of playing the game with harder difficulties from the jump, it might have been received a little better. With just how boring and easy the game comes across with its standard difficulty, no one feels the need to come back to this game. But if the game had rubbed you that way, I would suggest giving it another go around on hard mode and you might actually have a half decent time. Especially if you beat Dante's missions on Dante Must Die, you unlock Trish as a playable character. She comes equipped with Sparta and plays exactly like Dante from the first game. She feels right at home to play with. Too bad you gotta play the game 3 times over just to unlock her. Unless, yeah, you can put in this button combination on the menu screen to unlock her from the start. So as a last resort to get those who are opposed to touching DMC2, if Lucia's campaign ain't cutting it for you, put in this code to unlock Trish to play through both campaigns with their original cutscenes still intact. This, in my opinion, is the most optimal way to play through the game. You get the story of DMC2 if you want it, with the gameplay of DMC1, if not slightly watered down DMC1. The newly implemented amulet system introduced in this game was a neat idea, having Dante and Lucia finding items called Devil Hearts that would let you customize aspects of your Devil Trigger from your menu screen. You would have the ability to switch out attributes depending on the situations or the playstyle that suited you best. It was divided into 3 subsections, including the movement of your character, elemental aspects that could be used to enemies that are more vulnerable to a certain type of element, and support hearts that would allow healing over time, more damage output altogether, and even a heart that lets you slow down time. This system would never be introduced again in another Devil May Cry title, but I think it had enough legs to bring a good variety to Devil May Cry 2's combat that I think some people are ignorant to. It really was a creative idea I would like to see return to the series. DMC also introduced the game mode Bloody Palace, which is now a staple of the series. In this iteration, the goal is to kill all the enemies on levels 1 upwards to level 9,999. The enemy groupings are semi-random for each run through the palace, with levels ending with 0 spawning bosses. Enemies on levels 1 through 100 use normal difficulty settings. On levels 101 to 1000 hard, level 1001 and higher must die mode, and the highest level 9,999 is repeated indefinitely, making the player fight nearly every boss in the game. This mode ends only with the death of the player character. This is a fun addition to DMC2 once clearing the game on normal difficulty, challenging the player if they want to get a hang of combos, while gaining extra orbs and max out upgrades if they so please. Speaking of the mob enemies, they now have their own health bars displayed at the bottom left corner of the screen, unlike the first one, which gave you no indication on how close to death an enemy was. This time it's on full display, which I don't mind, but liked how they intertwine enemies' health in a more subtle way with a lock-on system that was implemented in future entries. There's something about the health bar style though, and the way that it gives the idea of the enemy that reminds me of a PC game like Witcher 1 that I like aesthetically. Hey, here's that subjectivity I was talking about earlier. So it's really up in the air to decide whether or not this was an improvement upon Devil May Cry 1. But something 2 definitely improved upon from 1 is now the ability to select whichever level you want to play after clearing the game. This helps navigate the levels you do enjoy playing through and to skip the ones you get no enjoyment out of. I love playing through DMC1, but I wouldn't mind skimming past some levels that aren't as interesting. But who am I kidding? All the missions in 1 are so intertwined together, it would feel very disjointed to just pop into mission 15 from the start. We can now switch firearms by a press of a button, which was better implemented in DMC3, but weapon switching with just firearms in 2 doesn't really add flexibility to the gameplay, but I guess they didn't bother implementing sword switching to the control scheme because they all play the same. But hey, at least DMC2 introduced this idea for further iterations, so I truly see DMC2 as a stepping stone of good ideas improved upon later down the road. Boss fights as a whole are an overall downgrade, but there's some good ones that stick out. I mean, we got Phantom again. He's much less aggressive, but I would classify it as one of the better fights of Devil May Cry 2. Bulwark was a semi-interesting fight accompanied by 2 wolves that proves to be a competent enough fight, adding some layers with diverting the player's attention to balancing multiple targets. This was also showcased with the boss fight Trismagia, 3 floating heads that attack you with different elemental projectiles. This is one of the few fights that exude a Devil May Cry energy to them. I do really like how expressive their faces are. At the end of the game, once you defeat Arius, we are then matched up with the Demon King Argisax, but only being crudely summoned by a partly finished ritual. Argisax is just this blob of past bosses Dante has slain, but it was such a brilliant idea to put them all together in this blob of mass of like different enemy heads. It's so cool. So depending on whichever angle you tackle the boss, you'll have to learn a different enemy attack, and there's boss heads on every direction of this thing. And oh my god, Griffin is back again. Please let him go, Capcom. Please let him go. Even though this boss design is brilliant, it does fall a bit flat as you could just cheese your way by spamming the missile launcher at a certain angle of the boss face that it can't hit you, and finding an angle that you could cheese is not hard to find. After Argisax is defeated, its true form then spawns the Despairing Body, shifting from a female to male physique. This is a really cool character design. Argisax's final form is very aggressive and fast, which finally we get a boss fight that could be considered to be on par with Nilo Angelo from the first game. The only problem is Dante is still slow by the end of the game, so the impact of fighting Argisax is still underwhelming. And he's still pretty easy along with the rest of the game, but credit where credit is due, they at least had one boss fight I would count as one of my favorites from the whole entire series. Well, there you go. I think I've exhausted all the positive aspects of the game I could possibly come up with, but I don't want to end on that note. The game resonates with me for some reason, even possibly more so than DMC1. Don't get me wrong, anyone who knows me personally knows that DMC1 is one of my favorite video games of all time, but DMC2 captures a certain je ne sais quoi that brings me for another playthrough from time to time. The game even got me to make a video that is this long and in depth. Maybe it really does elicit something special and unique that people have been overlooking for years. Or I just have Stockholm Syndrome for the game. It's most likely the latter. The setting of a quasi-South America location is really interesting, blending some of the medieval style of DMC1 with some modern architecture that makes for a pretty unique setting that just didn't reach its full potential due to the obvious time constraints. Please don't judge me too much, this game does hold a place in my heart, and I hope that after hearing my deposition on Devil May Cry 2, that maybe you'll give it a try too if you haven't already. Yeah, this game is a mess, that is for sure, but damn it if it doesn't have one of the more interesting development story in game dev history. I hope that you learned something new watching this video, and if not, maybe we could have a mutual agreement to the issues that are prevalent throughout the game. The game had some good ideas that added to the franchise, and it really shows the potential that the game could have had that would possibly be on par with DMC3. But like everything in life, there has to be a yin to the yang. Without the lackluster DMC2, we wouldn't have the massive achievement that was Devil May Cry 3 that brought the franchise to new heights I bet Capcom could have never imagined. So I thank you, Devil May Cry 2, for inadvertently pushing Devil May Cry to a quality threshold it may not have reached if it weren't for you being so crappy. I sincerely thank you all for watching. Wow, what a ride it's been to make this video. This was the longest time I have ever spent on a video, and it feels oddly surreal wrapping it up, and I've been tirelessly putting it all together. I put a lot of work and passion into making it and hope it genuinely was entertaining for you all to watch. I set up a Patreon as I think this channel can only survive by being user supported, as my future content will take a significant amount of time to put together as well. So if you think my content is worth the money, I would be most gracious. Even $1 goes a long way in moral support. But you have my gratitude just for watching, and please consider subscribing. Links are in the description.
Yeah, let's go all the way to hell.